The program. This is National Soil and Water Stewardship Week. I've kind of coined it National Soil Health Week. My guest in the program today is Ed McNamara. Ed is a farmer from over in Goodhue County, and for many years you've been on the Goodhue County Soil and Water Conservation District Board. You've had an interest in soil conservation for many years, Ed.
Yes, Jerry, thank you for having me on today. Yes, I was elected to the board back in 1996, I believe, so I've been on for not quite 20 years.
Just being a farmer, you were interested in learning more about soil conservation and maybe wanting to help everyone else?
Well, not so much learn about it. We're learning every day about conservation and conservation practices, but just having an interest to serve the public and help direct policy for all the citizens of Goodhue County.
How about an update on planting progress in Goodhue County? A lot of prep work was done, fertilizer down, and maybe some corn planted?
Yep, there was a fair amount of fertilizer went on, anhydrous on, manure hauled. Corn planting, I would say, is probably 20% done. The old adage is, you plant in dust, the bins will bust. So those guys that planted here last week should probably
build another bin.
Build another bin. I did on the way over. I did see 2 bin foundations going in this week now, which kind of surprised me. It's only April and they're building grain bins already.
Talked to a couple farmers during the week who, like I did, planted some corn. Some pushed it pretty hard. Said, Jerry, what do you think? And I said, I'll let you know how it turns out in about 2 or 3 weeks. We'll know whether it was better off in the soil planted or it's still in the bag.
Yeah, it's whether or not that corn was in dry dirt, they're moisture-wise, the guys in the sandier, lighter soil, probably, if you got an inch of rain, you might have chilled that seedling, but I just don't think we had enough rain to chill that seedling, and especially if you just planted it on Friday. I mean, it hasn't moved.
Well, I planted on Saturday afternoon. It was 72 degrees
right,
outside.
Right,
soil
right.
temperatures were way up. It didn't
way
really
up.
get cold, the northwest wind blowing till
Right.
later on Sunday. So
yeah.
I don't think we need to be too concerned about the corn, the chill factor they call it, where
right.
the first moisture that
right.
seed absorbs
right.
is so cold it kind
right.
of shocks it.
Right, because it the kernel hasn't taken that in yet. Basically, it'll start here now this coming week. So I would think, we're supposed to get up to 65 again by next Saturday or so. So I would anticipate, the sprouts. I would anticipate the corn that got in middle of last, a week ago per se. That corn's probably got something sticking out of it here by now.
About a minute and a half, Ed. We have to take a break for the markets. In the time that's left before that, talk a little bit about the Soil and Water Stewardship Week on a national level, how it kind of all got started, how long we've been trying to take a week set aside to think about our soil.
Yep, sure. Soil and Water Stewardship Week actually starts this coming Sunday, and it runs through May 3rd. And it was started, this is the 60th year. And the theme for this year is local heroes, your hardworking pollinators, which we can get into that after the break. But it basically is to across the country having 1 week that we really focus on our soil and our water stewardship week across demographics, across areas of the country, and across the various climates that we have across.
I noticed you said soil and water, so folks that live in town, well, you have some water that falls on your property, and so you can do your part too to help keep everything clean. But Ed, if you can stand by, we have to take a break for them. On Sunday is National Soil and Water Stewardship Week. In the studio is Ed McNamara, who's on the Goodhue County Soil and Water Conservation District Board and also a farmer. And Ed, you mentioned before the break, this has been going on now for 60 years, and I think the interest really got started in soil conservation probably going back to the Dust Bowl days in the 30s.
Right, Jerry. As I believe it was last 14th, was considered the Black Sunday.
That was the day that
was the day
part of the Midwest descended on the capital.
Yep. And that was that day, and so that really kind of lend itself to got the attention of the people on the West Coast, or excuse me, on the East Coast, that the West Coast might be blowing towards them. Drought, no rain, poor soil, full with tillage, plowed up prairie grass that had deep roots, and planted wheat. Basically depleted the soil and didn't replenish it, and basically the winds, nothing to slow the winds down, and it was basically a black blizzard.
Well, wasn't it Congress that was debating a bill to help try and get Soil Conservation Service started and some things to help farmers conserve the soil? And whichever senator was in charge of that bill knew that it wasn't going to pass. He didn't have the votes. So he basically filibustered, killed time because he knew that this big dust storm cloud was moving toward Washington, D.C., and he killed enough time until that got there, and we had almost a blackout at the Capitol in Washington, D.C., and then everyone said, boy, we better do something about this.
Right, and there was people that had basically pneumonia, and when they died of it, and they got the pneumonia because their lungs basically were filled up with dust. And cattle, same way. Can you imagine now if you had cattle that the air was so full of dust that breathing that in would fill your lungs up and basically you would suffocate. I mean, that would just be
horrible to think about.
Tough to think about, but there are areas around the world that it is still happening, and that's part of the reason that we need to not just one day or 1 week out of the year, that we really probably need to be thinking about it throughout the year, whether it's the dead of winter or the heat of the summer, that the soil and the water is a very precarious situation, and we need to keep that balance intact if we're going to keep on producing food and fiber for our country.
Well, this is what came out of the Dust Bowl, is that great partnership between taxpayer, i.e. the government, and individual landowners with cost share programs. And boy, if you think about the tremendous progress we've made since the 30s in terms of learning how to manage our soil and to try and preserve it for the next generation.
Right, and you've looked at how just agriculture has changed from that. We've gone from just producing wheat, and the corn we produced was feed for cows, and soybeans weren't even introduced yet.
I remember my grandpa telling the story. First years he raised soybeans, they were a forage crop. There was no market for them at the elevator. They were bailed up.
We weren't making biodiesel out of them, and sides for combines, and all these things that we've been able to develop through research money, to find new uses for that. But at the same time, we've also spent money for researching better ways for soil, keeping the soil on the ground, and for protecting our water resources.
And the key is residue management. That's really the key, isn't it? And why don't you explain what we mean by residue management? Maybe some folks are involved in agriculture and they don't know what we are referring to when we say residue.
Well, we'll take it to an urban one. So you have a garden, and you got your flower beds or whatever. So let's say you have a vegetable garden. You remove the fruit, and then what do you do with what's left? The vines, or the tops of the
let me see. We throw it on a pile and burn it.
We
used to.
It's dry.
We used to.
Yeah, I can remember burning soybean straw. So,
I can remember there was a lot of corn residue when I was growing up, and it was plugging up the plow. So a nice dry day, they went out and lit it, and it burned across the field. And I shudder to think about that happening, but that's what they did back then.
Well, and the Native American communities, to manage the the prairie, tall grass, they did control burns too. So I mean, you know, burning does have its place, you know, but with that, you know.
Not in my field, no.
Well, yeah,
Not anymore.
Not anymore, no. But they manage that tall prairie grass to get lush growth for buffalo by burning off.
They kind of rejuvenated the soil.
They did a control burn. So you burnt this, you know, 5-foot tall buffalo grass, and that made it into ash. And then when it rained, the roots regenerated, and the rain helped take that nutrients that were in that crop residue back down into the soil to make the grass grow better. It's the same thing we're doing now with residue management. We're taking our residue, we're removing our soybeans and removing our corn, and then the residue is left in the field, so we need to manage that. So in order to get that to break down to become available for future crops, residue management. You incorporate some of it, depending on the soils. That's where research has come into play. If you incorporate some of it, you have the bacteria from the soil working on that crop residue to break it back down into the NP and K and the sulfur.
Back into the inorganic minerals.
And into the next crop the new crop that's coming will be able to take back up. And then so you're not, you don't have to put on so much crop fertilizer for it. You can utilize that, and you can also the same way with manure is actually should be called a livestock fertilizer applied to the soil.
I call it organic fertilizer.
Organic fertilizer, but it's the same deal. You're taking the NP and the K and the other nutrients that are in that livestock residue, and you're putting it back onto the soil to be broken down by Mother Nature and the soil organisms to make it available for the next crop.
When it comes to protecting your soil from wind erosion, from water erosion, it's all about having that crop residue on the soil surface to slow down the water or slow down the wind.
Well, yes, in wind particles blowing across, just standing corn stalks in the fall will stop a lot of that. You drive around during the winter, and we've seen fields that have not a lot of crop residue left on top of them, and you ended up with snow and dirt in the ditch called snert. And so that's very nutrient laden soil particles that have left your field now, and now are in an area where a heavy rain will move that down into the stream. So if we can anchor that soil in the fields to keep it from moving away, whether it be crop residue, cover crops, going to no-till and keeping that to protect that soil, but yet have it with our soils here. The biggest problem we have is getting our soils warm enough in the spring to get the plants up and out of the ground.
And that's called tile.
Yep, that's another water management issue, water quality. So if you add subsurface drainage to soils that have a higher water table, you're not draining all the water out of the soil. You're only drawing that water down to a level that it will not adversely affect the majority of the plant's roots.
We should mention too that the equipment manufacturers have come a long way in terms of promoting some form of conservation tillage, minimum tillage, or even no-till, developing the equipment so that will handle this residue on the soil surface. Right. Remember back when our grandpas were farming, a sign of a good farmer was a nice black field in the fall. Black
field and straight rows.
Mm-hmm.
And so now for you and I, our straight rows are with GPS.
We cheat.
And our eyesight isn't good enough where we could sit and line it up with a utility pole at the end of the field, or spend too much time turning around looking at the planter and trusting the planter monitor. But as far as the no-till has come a long way, from even the first ones that have come out, almost 40 years ago now, the first no-till drills. And the planter's heavy enough to cut the residue,
or the residue managers, we call them whippers,
the trash whippers, to move it out of the way, so you'd have a bare path, 6 inches, 8 inches wide, that corn would be warmed up, and you'd have the residue between the rows to protect the corn seedlings and the soil, you know, from moving away. And if you got a heavy rain, well, you had a lot of residue that water would work, basically infiltrate. It's slow the flow down. It's slow that velocity of that raindrop down.
Yeah, Tom Kaufman with the Rice County NRC always talks about the residue breaking the velocity of that rain as it falls, because there's a lot of force there. Yep. And the residue breaks up that force as it hits the soil.
Right. Same as a tree. I mean, just think of, you know, where do you stand? Where do people most of the time stand when it's raining? Well, they go under a tree because it's not raining hard there.
Real good place to be when you have lightning.
Not lightning, just when it's raining. You know. And so that's one way to basically amplify the forces. If you stand underneath a tree, it's living, it's slowing the flow. It's still, the rain still gets to the ground, but it's just not that hard velocity, and that's basically what crop residue, crop canopy will do to slow that velocity of the rain, so it'll have a minimum effect on moving soil particles.
Should talk just a bit about what folks living in town can do in terms of protecting our water quality. Well, they have a major role to play too.
Yep, they have a major role to play. I mean, it's everybody's water.
And you use the example of an inch of rain. How many? It's just incredible when you start thinking about the amount of volume.
An inch of rain on an acre is 27,000 gallons of water. Now, I don't know how many gallons of water you go through at your house in a month, but I pretty much would guarantee I don't think you go through 27,000 gallons of water. And an acre is basically the size of a football field, including the end zones. So to give you a reference on how big an acre is, now most houses in town, I would say, are maybe a third of an acre. So you take a third of that. So a third of 27,000 is 9,000 gallons. Okay. Now, in our average rainfall in our area now has moved up from about 32 up to 35 inches of rain in a year.
Okay, so now run that math. That's a lot of water.
That's a lot of water that's falling on your property. So yeah, some of it falls on the lawn, some of it falls on the roof, then you have your rain gutters running it off, and some of it falls on your cement in your driveway and runs down in the storms. You know. So basically, everybody wants to get rid of this water. They don't want it, but yet people will turn around and they will. Well, I need to water my shrubs and I need to water my lawn. You know, they have sprinklers. So if they would use a rain barrel, they could capture this rainwater. It doesn't cost anything other than the cost of the rain barrel. And you can be extravagant as you want, but you know, a couple $100 gets you a couple of rain barrels set around, and you can use the soaker holes out of those through your shrubs around your house, and you just put a valve in the bottom of it, and you can basically use drip irrigation through your shrubs. You won't be paying the water meter for that. And then washing your car, instead of doing it on the driveway where your soap or whatever would be down the driveway and into the storm sewer right to the river, if you did it on the grass, it would go down through the grass first, or go to the car wash, and it could have done that.
There's something too about rainwater. Now when it gets dry in the summer, the farm boy living in Faribault is going to have a green lawn. And I have an underground watering system, and looks a little dry. I punch the button and it cycles again. And I can keep it green, but it won't get that lush green until I have some rain from Mother Nature. And I don't know if it's the
nitrogen.
If it's the nitrogen that you're getting from the rain, or maybe it's cold water, maybe hard water, other nutrients, or
probably most of it is probably the nitrogen that's coming with the rain when it's coming out of the thunderstorm, because that the electrodes in that you're adding nitrogen to that. And it's the same way, you know, it's not recommended to drink rainwater, but yet, you know, there's other things that you do with water other than drinking that you can do it that way. And all water ends up being rainwater at some time in its life. So
we just keep recycling it.
Just keep recycling. That's the water system is the ultimate recycling system for the earth.
Should probably mention too about folks living in town now. It's the time when they're putting different herbicides on their lawn to keep crabgrass and dandelions from growing. And well, so what if a little is good? That means a lot is better. And it doesn't matter if some falls on the driveway, because it'll go away.
Yeah, well, it's the same way with
right away into the river.
Right away, anything that falls on your driveway goes down through the street. So if you got a car that's got an oil leak on it, it's a straight shot to the river. And we are trying so hard to. We've got more people living in a concentrated area, so the concentration of all of our actions ends up being more of a concentration to our water sources, and that's why we need to talk about water conservation practices.
Farmers know where help and advice is available, local NRCS offices, SWCDs, but folks living in town, where can they find out more about it and just maybe make sure that they're doing everything they can to protect water quality?
Well, the soil and water conservation districts serve all the citizens of all the counties.
Well, you mainly think it's working just with landowners,
and the
big landowners.
And the majority of them are farmers, land owners in the country, but most soil conservation districts will have one person on staff that will help with urban city, and you've got within the cities you've got people that have their commercial greenhouses, the flower shops. I mean, those people are good resource specialists, and our university staff, they have people on staff to help with that too.
And same way, a lot of local garden stores, farm and hardware stores where folks might be buying some of these products, normally if they're selling them, they have someone who's pretty knowledgeable in how to use those products too.
Well, they should. I mean, if they're selling a chemical product, they had to have that license, and if they're selling plant material, they need a license in the state of Minnesota for that also. So because you don't want to be planting a plant that's not approved. Not approved. I mean, there's plants that you can't take up. You can't bring plants into like California. You can't bring plants into Minnesota from Canada unless they've been past the
customs
inspection. Department of Ag inspection. And now as Arbor Day is coming up, and there's a lot of trees bouncing around through mail order and that, and those all have to be when you buy those are approved to be planted, be sold in Minnesota and planted in Minnesota, so you don't get an invasive species like purple loosestrife. Was a wonderful plant 30 years ago. Oh, geez, that's so pretty. Now it's overtaken some of those areas. So you have to be careful what you plant. Plant something that's native. Extension has a pretty good website on that. What are some of our native plants, and like you mentioned before, having them winter hardy enough that they'll survive our winters. And sometimes you can fudge that by covering them up or planting them closer to buildings or whatever with that. We had a discussion here last month with our dean, our forester, and I popped the question to him. I go, well, what do you think about the emerald ash borer and all the ash trees that are in these farmstead windbreaks? And I said, what's going to be the recommended tree now? And he says, probably more of a hardwood type of a deal, or a red type maple should be able to survive that. And I'm thinking, well, that'd be a pretty nice evergreen conifer, and then a nice red stripe through there. Somebody that was truly a John Deere guy would probably want something that would be golden in that stripe.
That's right. And we only have about 2.5 minutes before we have to wrap this up. But you mentioned pollinators at the beginning of the show. Let's talk a bit about that and what folks can do to help out the bee population.
Well, the world is all about there's all a buzz about the pollinators. Pollinators play a critical role in our everyday lives, and it's important that we work to protect their habitat. What many pollinators may seem like just an annoying insect, they're actually a very important part of our web of life upon which we all depend. Pollinators form the underpinning of a healthy and sustainable future for food and the environment, but they have shown disturbing signs of decline in the recent years. When the pollinator numbers shrink, many plants either produce less seed or no seed at all. The bottom line is when pollinators start disappearing, plants will start disappearing. Most plants depend upon pollinators to reproduce. While animals can travel and move around to find mates and reproduce, plants are rooted in one spot. Therefore, the plant depends on pollinators to move pollens from one part of the plant to the other. On the planet Earth, there are more than 100,000 species of insects, including bees, flies, moths, butterflies, beetles that work as pollinators. There's also over 1,000 species of other animals, such as birds and reptiles and mammals, including bats, that are pollinators. And so your local conservation district can assist you in maintaining or developing habitat for pollinators.
Pollinators, bees.
Bees.
Mainly bees, isn't it? Are there other insects that are?
Well, but I mean, it's mainly bees. But I mean, there's other things that fly around, you know,
and spread the pollen.
And spread the pollen around. But bats are kind of interesting too.
Yeah, you mentioned bats.
You know, it's just like, you know, well, I mean, they're moving around, you know, and you know they're going after an insect that happens to be in your apple flower or something. But I mean, you know, bats are kind of the biggie for controlling mosquitoes. You know, because they eat a lot of mosquitoes every night, so that's kind of a cool thing to have around.
Well, and we have news for ABC coming up. Thanks for stopping by once again. Folks want to learn more about it, whether you're a landowner or you live in town, start with your local SWCD office.
Yep, thank you, Jerry.
Ed McNamara was on the Goodhue County Soil and Water Conservation District.